Sharon and I moved into our new house, our new home. It still feels a little like a house, but soon, when we get all our boxes unpacked.
People moved into yours?
Yes.
Oh,
And the first night they were there, they had a visitor at 10:30 at night. Someone came by looking for a beer on the back patio.
not for you.
It was Hannah. I guess we forgot to tell Hannah we moved. Oh well. They quickly shut the curtains, and she thought, oh, I guess Mom and Dad, Dad and Sharon have moved. So, anyway, good to be with you. On that really hot day, I just could not handle having hair anymore, so I had Sharon cut it. It was actually her idea. I'm still getting used to it. A lot of changes, but mostly good.
Change is good.
We have the lacrosse trip coming up. Lots of you have signed up already, and we're going to be taking a fun little trip. If you're still thinking about it, talk to Sharon. If you don't have your check this morning, no big deal. By next Sunday, we'll need a firm count to give to the hotel. All right, let us begin with our call to worship. Let us draw near to God.
Let
Let's put down the weights we carry.
Let us open ourselves to God's Spirit.
Let
Let's come again to be filled.
Open our hearts to receive your love.
Make us a vessel of your love for the world.
Our God.
Today's reading is from the 18th chapter of Luke. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. Here ends the reading.
So Jesus is speaking with his disciples. And he's telling them a story that fleshes out something he said on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, before you go and take the speck out of somebody else's eye, you take the log out of your own eye. Well, here he tells a story to his disciples. And first of all, he says, there are 2 men that go up to the temple to pray. The first one is a Pharisee. And the Pharisee stands there and he kind of looks up to the heavens and says, thank you, God, for not making me be like all of those other terrible people. And he goes on and he prays this long prayer, which Pharisees sometimes did. I was reading a book about this parable by Amy Jill Levine, and she said that just like there was a in Christianity, the search for the historical Jesus movement. In Judaism, there was the search for the historical Pharisee movement. Because they wanted to know, are all the things that they said and heard about Pharisees true? And especially the Gospels that were written at a time when all Christians were Jews, but they were a different sect of Jews, and they were trying to lure people away from some of the other sects that were more conservative, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so sometimes things that are written do not portray the Pharisees and the Sadducees in a very fair light. And I can say I have been guilty of this as well. I only knew what I grew up hearing about this, and when you read the Bible, it sort of casts all Pharisees as people like the one in this parable. The problem is that Jesus used parables to shock people. So to simply say there was a good tax collector would be a shock, but also would have been a shock to say, here is a Pharisee that misses the point completely. Historically, Pharisees lived the law as perfectly as they could. Their heart was fully in it, because to live the law of Moses perfectly was a lot of work. And you couldn't just go, well, this is more of a guideline. No, you really had to do it. And so these Pharisees were so committed and respected. Jesus had respect for Pharisees. In fact, the only person who is a self-avowed, I was a Pharisee, is the Apostle Paul. And he says, I was a Pharisee's Pharisee. In other words, I was even better than all the rest at this. And he doesn't find that to be a conflict. So Jesus tells this parable. And the Pharisee, shockingly, does not have his heart in it. That would be really hard to do. And then we have the tax collector. Well, everybody knows tax collectors are not your friend. Especially at the time of Jesus. What the tax collectors did is they worked for the Roman emperor. And they kept an eye on everything. They were not collecting property tax. That was still the job of the Jewish hierarchy. But they were collecting taxes on everything you sold, like a sales tax. And so when the tax collector would sit in the market, at the end of the beginning of the day, he would come around and he would tally up everything you had. And at the end of the day, he would tally up everything you sold. And then he would hand you a bill for taxes. And sometimes it was more than what it should have been. And so, to find a tax collector who was justified, the tax collector comes to the same temple as the Pharisee, and instead of looking up to God, he's looking down and he's beating his breast, which is a sign of humility. It's a sign of, I really screwed this up. And he says, I am a poor, miserable sinner. And then the parable ends when Jesus says, the Pharisee and the tax collector. The tax collector was justified, and then there's this Greek word para. And then there is the Pharisee. Now, our English translation says rather than. So, the one who was justified was the tax collector rather than the Pharisee. But that's not what the word para means. I mean, even if you don't know Greek at all, you might have heard of parallel. What is two parallel lines? They go the same way. What is a paramedic? Someone who works instead of or alongside of. What is all the examples of para are like if you were a rich person in my town and you had a cabin on a lake and you had a swimming dock and a fishing dock, you had a paradox. Okay, that was bad. But both of the docks were alongside each other. Actually, at the time of Jesus, there was a teaching in Judaism that the best people at keeping the law would create sort of this overall pool of righteousness that splashed out in every direction into the community. And so another way of translating this was to say that the tax collector was justified alongside of the Pharisee. And that God's grace extends both to tax collectors and to people who think they're too good. I mean, that's good news, because that's all of us. I mean, every single one of us, because it's human nature to look at ourselves and go, yeah, I'm pretty good, but those people, right, that person, and God's grace is big enough to cover us in that time along with them. I think God knows us. God knew the tax collector, God knew the Pharisee, and realized that we're all doing the best that we can. Or maybe not. But usually when someone's not doing the best they can, it's because of something that happened to them at some point in their life that is, maybe they had a lack of good parenting. And to blame people for their shortcomings is really easy, and it happens all the time. It's what our world has become. And this parable calls us to say, God's grace is bigger than that. God's grace is bigger even for us on the days when we think we don't need it.